So the odds of winning the Powerball jackpot are roughly 1 in 300 million. Pretty minuscule. In fact, it's so small that it's difficult for us to wrap our minds around numbers like that, because we're not built to be able to process numbers on that scale. So to help us understand it, they come up with all sorts of analogies, like you're 200 more times likely to be struck by lightning, or your odds of hitting a hole-in-one in golf is only like 1 in 12,000. So compared to winning the lottery, basically a given. Why do I bring this up? Because the number of stars in the known universe is estimated to be 2 billion trillion stars. Or to put it another way, 200 sextillion. So if the odds of winning the lottery are 1 in 300 million, the odds of our sun being the only one in the universe to harbor life is roughly 1 in 200 sextillion. Those are the odds of us being alone in the universe. So what does this mean for us as Christians? What would the discovery of alien life say about our faith? What does that mean from a theological perspective? And what does the Bible have to say? Let's take a look.
Attention, bargain shoppers.
So the head of the Vatican Observatory Foundation, along with another prominent philosopher, wrote a book called Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? It's kind of a silly question on its surface, but the book uses it to raise some interesting theological questions, something near and dear to my heart. Questions about how science and faith should interact with each other, things of that nature. Additionally, I read an article once that Pope Francis, he brought up Martians in a sermon and used it as a commentary on the early church, showing that if Jews and Gentiles could associate with each other, then faith can transcend ethnic boundaries. It can go beyond culture. Kind of like how God gave a vision to the Apostle Peter about how the message of salvation should transcend culture and ethnicity. Even the words alien, stranger, and immigrant are often translated interchangeably in biblical texts. So if the church could and should welcome immigrants or aliens, why not actual aliens? Why not extraterrestrials? Point is that this is a question a lot of people have pondered. For some, it's just an interesting thought experiment. Others may take it more seriously. So I'd like to break this topic down into two different questions. Number one, does the Bible say anything specifically about aliens? And number two, if we were to discover aliens existed, what would that mean for our faith? Okay, so the first one, does the Bible say anything about aliens? And I'm going to tell you up front, there is no scripture that directly references little green men living on celestial bodies as we would think about aliens today. However, there are some very interesting and some very cryptic verses worth exploring. First off, humans are not the only species, race, beings that God created. God did create angels, angelic beings. Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." From a theological perspective, angels are very real beings. They have jobs. Some are messengers, some are warriors, some are servants, some are helpers. They have feelings. They experience joy. They're capable of sinning or breaking their promises. For all intents and purposes, angels are interdimensional beings. They move between our reality and the heavenly realms. I'll do a video explaining angels in more detail. You can check that out here. I mean, we can see firsthand God's creativity and imagination on display on this planet alone. Is it really that far-fetched to think that his creativity would extend beyond our solar system? And angels aside, there are also some verses in the Bible that are a little bit strange. In the book of Job, for example, God is explaining to Job about his vastness. And the author describes something a little bit weird. In Job chapter 38, it reads, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy." Now, it is true that this could be just a poetic turn of phrase, but it's interesting that in the same context that angels are mentioned, we're also told about morning stars singing together. There's also an odd passage in Genesis 6:4, which a race is mentioned that you might have heard of called the Nephilim. Genesis 6:4 reads, The Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans who bore children to them. And it goes on to say that these offspring became mighty men of old, men of renown, these historical legends, offspring between the Nephilim and the daughters of humans. We don't actually have an explanation of what the Nephilim are, but it's fun to speculate. There are also some God-given visions, prophecies which describe creatures or objects that are a little bit strange. First, the Lord gave a vision to Ezekiel. But before we explore this, I don't want to mislead you. There are many biblical scholars who have given interpretations to these visions, and they've connected them to historical events, things people would have recognized in that day. But even so, the method and description of these things Ezekiel saw has been a source of debate. In Ezekiel 1:4-6, he describes what he sees. He says, I looked and I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud with flashing lightning and surrounded by a brilliant light. The center of the fire looked like glowing metal, and in the fire was what looked like 4 living creatures. In appearance, their form was human, but each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. So when you've got things like clouds, light, fire, metal, these are all things that could be just symbolic of strength, of royalty, things of that nature. But it's interesting because when you put it all together, the image appears kind of strange. And this is just an artist's interpretation of his vision. But it's a little weird, gotta say. Is it only symbolism? Or is it somebody describing an alien spacecraft? Someone who has no concept of machines or technology, doing his best to convey what he saw. These human-like creatures piloting a glowing metal object in the clouds. There is also a vision that God gave to John. John is the author of the book of Revelation, and this book has been analyzed a whole bunch. It's definitely possible it was written symbolically or poetically, but not all scholars agree. And the idea is that God is showing John an image of heaven. And he talks about some of the things that he sees. Revelation 4:6-8 says, in front of the throne there was what looked like a sea of glass, clear as crystal. In the center around the throne were 4 living creatures, and they were covered with eyes, in front and in back. The first living creature was like a lion, the second was like an ox, the third had a face like a man, the fourth was like a flying eagle. Each of the 4 living creatures had 6 wings and was covered with eyes all around, even under its wings. So like I said, there are some different interpretations of these verses. But if John was really seeing a glimpse into heaven and saw some weird beings, some creatures he had never seen before, is it possible he was just doing his best to describe something he couldn't understand? And if this is a literal glimpse into heaven, is it possible these creatures only exist in heaven? Or is it possible they could exist somewhere else in the universe, and it's only after they die they find themselves in heaven just like us? So there's not really a ton of clear theological answers as to the existence of aliens, but it's fun to think about, and there's definitely no shortage of strange verses that we could take a look at. But the second question, if we were to discover aliens, what would that look like for our personal faith? This question is sort of like, is it okay to believe aliens might exist as a Christian? Or what would be the theological implications of aliens existing? And for this question, as far as I can tell, there would be no theological implications. I'm reminded about the Native Americans in the New World. All the terribleness and misery that the Europeans brought with them aside. When they came, they found an isolated people that had no knowledge of Jesus, of salvation, of Christianity, and they really had no idea of anything that would be staples of our Christian faith. And that did not create a conflict for Christianity. It could perhaps raise questions about what is God's plan for people that have never been told about Jesus. And that's a valid question worth exploring in a different video. But the Native Americans are still a part of God's plan and God's creation. We see this through verses like Colossians 1:16, which reads, for in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Or verses like John 1:3, Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. So that's it for today. Not super deep subject matter, but fun to think about nonetheless. Please feel free to leave a comment below. I do read all the comments and I will respond as I get time. I'll also leave the verses we used today in the description below. Feel free to like and subscribe. It does help out the channel. My name is Adam. This is Bargain Bin Theology, and remember, you get what you pay for.